It's hard to even know where to begin. I suppose I should start with who I am, or maybe with how everything changed so suddenly, like a storm that leaves you standing in the middle of a rectangular landscape, not knowing where to go or what to do. My name is Sophia, and I'm 28 years old. I used to think my life was a simple one: work, love, the occasional weekend getaway with friends, nothing too extraordinary. At least I never thought so. I had a boyfriend, Dylan, a charming man in his early 30s with a smile that made everything feel like it was going to be okay. We'd been together for almost 2 years when it all came crashing down. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I had planned to surprise Dylan with dinner. I'd made his favourite meal, something I knew he'd love, and I was eager to see his reaction. He wasn't answering his phone, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We'd been busy with our own lives, but I was sure everything was fine. I was always so sure. When I walked into his apartment, the door slightly ajar, I had no idea that my world was about to shatter. The first thing I saw was the familiar sound of laughter, but it wasn't Dylan's. It was a woman's high-pitched, carefree laugh, the kind of laugh that makes you feel like nothing is wrong. And then I saw them, Dylan and Clara, his co-worker, sprawled on the couch together, wrapped in each other's arms. My heart stopped, my legs gave out beneath me, and I almost couldn't breathe. I didn't scream, I didn't shout, I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out, the tears stinging my eyes, before I even made it to the hallway. The days after that felt like I was living in a fog. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I couldn't, every thought I had revolved around what happened, about how I had been so blind, so trusting, so stupid. Dylan tried to apologize, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I couldn't stay in this city anymore. I couldn't stay in that apartment where every corner felt like a lie. I needed to get away. That's when I decided to move in with my grandfather. Grandpa Charles had always been a rock for me. He was the kind of man who exuded warmth, wisdom, and strength. He was the person I turned to when I was younger, the person who taught me to ride a bike, who showed me how to grow plants. Oh, God, I loved him deeply. The thought of living with him, even temporarily, felt like a safe harbor. He'd been living alone in the old family house for several years after my grandmother passed away. The house, tucked away on the outskirts of town, always felt like a place of refuge, a peaceful, quiet escape from the world. I never realized until then just how much I needed it. When I arrived at his house, he greeted me with his usual warm smile. "You're always welcome here. I'm glad you're staying." His words were simple, but they wrapped around me like a blanket. I felt a sense of comfort, that underneath that comfort, there was a deep ache, one I couldn't shake. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days unpacking, going through my work, trying to keep myself busy so I wouldn't have to think about what had happened. Grandpa never pushed me to talk about it. He knew I was hurting, but he gave me space, something I appreciated more than I could express. But as the days passed, something changed. I began to notice things about Grandpa that I hadn't before. Small things at first, how he would linger over old photos of my grandmother, how he would talk softly to the plants in the garden, as if they were his old friends. He had always been a quiet man, but there was a gentleness to him now, a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. It was a rainy afternoon when it first happened. I had been inside all day watching the rainfall in sheets outside the window. My mind drifted between thoughts of Dylan and the deep emptiness I still felt. I hadn't gone into Grandpa's studio in the back of the house in ages. It was where he used to paint before my grandmother died. It was a place I had always thought of as his private world, something sacred that I wasn't allowed to touch. But that day, I couldn't help myself. I walked down the hallway and into the studio. The door creaked open slowly. There he was, Grandpa, sitting in front of a canvas, a paintbrush in his hand. He didn't hear me at first, so I stood there watching him. His face was softer than I had ever seen it. There was something vulnerable about him, something that made my chest tighten. "Grandpa," I said quietly, stepping into the room. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to a quiet, knowing smile. "Sophia, I didn't hear you come in." I smiled back, but there was an unfamiliar sensation in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the connection I felt in that moment, the loneliness I saw in his eyes, or something else entirely. I walked over to him slowly, standing beside him. The studio smelled of oil paint and old wood, the soft scent mixing with the damp air from outside. I've been meaning to ask you," I began hesitantly, "why did you stop painting?" He looked at me, his gaze softening. I guess after your grandmother passed, I didn't have the heart for it anymore. It felt like she was part of every brush stroke. There was a sadness in his voice that made my heart ache. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words didn't come. Instead, I reached out and gently touched his shoulder. It was the simplest of gestures, a gentle touch on his shoulder, but in that moment something shifted between us. My hand lingered there longer than I intended, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt. I pulled my hand back slightly, unsure of what had just happened. But something about the way he turned to look at me held me still. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a tenderness that made my heart race. "Grandpa," I started, my voice breaking with the weight of everything I was feeling. The words felt like 1,000 unsaid things, but they refused to take shape. I wanted to tell him how much I missed him, how much I needed him, how his quiet presence was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't drowning in my own grief. But I couldn't. The emotions were too tangled up inside me, like a knot in my chest that couldn't be undone. His gaze softened even further, and for a brief moment I saw something in his eyes that I had never noticed before. Something deep, raw, and almost searching. It was as if he was waiting for something, and in that moment I realized that I was too. I don't know why I did it. It was impulsive, a feeling that surged up from deep within me, stronger than anything I could suppress. Without thinking, I leaned in closer to him, and before I could stop myself, my lips met his cheek lightly, softly, just as a gesture of comfort, of connection. But as my lips touched his skin, something more took hold of me, a flicker of heat, an undeniable pull, and my breath caught in my throat. Grandpa's body tensed for a split second, and for a moment I thought I'd done something wrong. I pulled back, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. I couldn't meet his eyes, but then he surprised me. His hand reached out gently, cupping my face, guiding me back toward him. His touch was so tender and slow, like he was afraid of scaring me away. "Sophia." His voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. "You don't have to do this. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but—" He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I can't help the way I feel." My breath caught in my throat. There it was, those words I had been dreading and anticipating all at once. I could feel the heat of his breath against my skin, the closeness of our bodies as we both sat there frozen in a moment of raw, unspoken emotion. It felt as if the world outside had stopped, leaving only the two of us in that fragile space. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "But I feel it too." My words hung in the air, suspended between us. Um, I could hardly believe I was saying them, yet they were the truth that had been building in me since the moment I moved in, the truth that I had been trying to ignore, pretending it wasn't there. Grandpa's hand remained on my face, his thumb gently brushing across my skin. He leaned in slowly, his face inches from mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. His eyes searched mine, like he was looking for permission, or perhaps for reassurance that this was something we could both give into without regret. He was so close now, I could feel the warmth radiating off him, smell the faint scent of his aftershave, mixed with the musk of old books and oil paints that filled the room. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to step back, to apologize, to pretend nothing had happened. But another part of me, something deeper, something I couldn't explain, wanted to stay in that moment, to see what would go. Grandpa's eyes flickered down to my lips, then back up to my eyes. His gaze was both tender and conflicted, as if he was trying to hold on to something he didn't want to lose. Me, or perhaps the quiet world he had lived in for so long. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice low and hoarse. "I know you're hurting, and I know you need love and comfort right now, but this—" He paused, the words caught in his throat, as if he too wasn't sure how to navigate the emotions swirling between us. "This is more than what you need. You deserve more than this." My breath came in shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, to let him know how much I needed him, how much I had craved his support, even if it felt wrong, even if this moment was too complicated to make sense of. But I couldn't. My heart was torn between 1,000 emotions: love, betrayal, guilt, desire. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered again, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Grandpa looked at me for a long moment, his hand still on my face, his thumb softly brushing across my skin. His expression softened, and I could see the love, the care, the vulnerability in his eyes. But he wasn't going to push me. He wasn't going to make me feel trapped in this moment. "I just want you to know," he said quietly, pulling back slightly, "that whatever happens, I'm here for you. I always will be. But I want you to make your own choices, Sophia. I want you to figure this out for yourself." His words felt like a weight lifting from my chest, and at the same time, they brought a new sense of responsibility. He was right. I did need to figure this out. Not just for myself, but for him too. I couldn't let this moment define our relationship. It couldn't be about a fleeting impulse, a moment of confusion, or a desperate search for comfort. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears brimming in my eyes. "I never meant this to happen." Grandpa gave a soft, knowing smile. "You don't need to apologize, Sophia. It's okay. Just take your time. You'll find your way. We both will." I nodded, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. The pain wasn't gone, but there was a strange comfort in his words, a reassurance that things would be okay. That night, after dinner, we sat on the porch together, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky as the crickets sang their song. I didn't speak much. and neither did he. But I didn't need to. The silence felt warm, as if we were both trying to heal in our own ways, giving each other the space to do so. I I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. I had grandpa and he had me. And for now, that was enough. But deep inside, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something irreparable, something beyond our control. And and that scared me more than anything.